instead of the smoking car, where if you want to go smoke, you can go be back there, right? We'll make that the Negro car in the back. So regardless of your status, regardless of whether you're a preacher or a ditch digger, that's where you go. So Plessy said, that's a violation of my rights. I want all of the things white folks get. So the question before the court is whether or not the 14th Amendment, right, whether or not you can engage in segregation in the 14th Amendment, under the auspices of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court in an 8-1 decision says yes. Segregation is not unconstitutional. You can do that as long as everything is separate but
equal.
Separate but equal. Spoiler alert, the American South is going to be really good at separate, not so good at equal. Right? And this image on the top, right? This is an image showing you the anxiety that the American South has, right? With regard to the possibility of black men sitting in close proximity to white women. Right? This specter of sexual degradation, which goes back to the racist stereotypes of voracious, sexually aggressive black men. Black women being sexually lascivious and open and available, right? These stereotypes woven into the fabric so much so that you've got a whole entire region of the country terrified with the prospect of black freedom and black autonomy because the first place their minds go is assault. The first place their minds go is they're coming to take our stuff. Meanwhile, we're over here trying to mind our own black business. Literally, our own black business. Cultivating businesses, cultivating churches, cultivating institutions. Missionaries go down to the American South and say, hey, we're going to help these Negroes with the construction of schools and colleges. One of my favorite stories, some white missionaries go down to Albany, Georgia, 1868, 1869. We're going to help them build a school. Get there in 1868, black folks have already built a school. It's 2 stories. They've already raised the money for the building. They've raised the money for the salaries. They've raised the money for the books. They've raised the money for the pencils. They've raised the money for everything. The white missionaries get down there. The black folks say, hey, thanks. Oh, we're so glad you're here. We're working on our 2nd building now, and you can help with that. The group of people most responsible for funding public education, for funding education for black folk in the American South is black folk.
That's right.
We did that. Yes, we had help. Yes, other folks came in and gave us all sorts of material resources, but nobody raised more money for schools than we did.
That's right.
Nobody raised more money for our institutions than we did. Nobody raised more money for black Baptist churches, black Presbyterian churches than we did. So Plessy is the starting gate for separate but equal, for the rise of Jim Crow. Next slide, please. Almost done. Bear with me. This moment of the late 1800s is also a moment that tries to stop the growth and the progress of Reconstruction. So we see black political and social reversal. We see disfranchisement eroding all of the gains, right, and the electoral progress of black folk, right? States start to pass laws specifically designed to bar black men from voting. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Passing a law in 1888 in Mississippi or Tennessee called the Grandfather Clause.
Yes.
Some of you have heard of that. Grandfather Clause says, and it sounds race neutral, it says, hey, if your grandfather could vote, you can vote. Whose granddaddy couldn't vote?
Ours.
Yeah, we know the answer to that. Literacy tests. Interpret this portion of the Constitution. Literacy tests are going to be around until 1965. Right? So we see a disfranchisement of the electoral gains. We see lynching as also another expression of political power. Right? Lynching is designed to send a message. And that message is we want to go back to the old operating system. And you're above your station. 57,000 people will be murdered.
Yep.
African Americans. That number has always been sort of depressed. But other scholars have come up now and said, look, when you count up all of the lynchings and the murders and the political assassinations, it's 57,000 people in this period, black folk who get murdered. And it's systematic. What does that mean? It means that the pastor of this church pastor of a church, say in South Carolina, pastor of a church really politically progressive and popular, and is getting people to vote. We're going to murder him, and then we're going to murder the associate pastor as well, right? Because he's going to take his place and do the same thing. And if we need to go down the line, we will, for the express purpose of breaking up this political and economic and institutional power that black folk are trying to build. All of this is being done in the name of freedom. Hey, we want to go back to the way it was. We want to go back to this other version of democracy. Black folk are in the forefront of trying to build something called a multiracial democracy. All of us can participate in this. Yellow, red, and black and white.
We're all precious in God's sight.
Yeah. But not so much in the American South in the 1880s, 1890s, early part of the 20th century. Southern states stripping away political rights from African Americans. Again, poll taxes, literacy tests, all of that stuff. Next slide, please. So legal segregation, Jim Crow in real time, right? The American South goes crazy. Oh, okay, separate but equal, separate. We're going to separate everything, right? And this is state, and this is legal, right? This isn't customs or traditions. This is encoded in the legal code of Southern states. Interracial adoptions, illegal. Separate public schools, separate hospitals. Watch the W.E.B. Du Bois documentary on PBS. And don't let this slide. His son gets sick in Atlanta. There's 2 black doctors in Atlanta. Both of those black doctors are out of town. So he goes to 3 white doctors and says, my son is desperately ill. Can you please treat him? The answer is no. We don't treat Negroes. I've got a colleague who wrote a paper about a black woman who goes into labor in Alabama in the early 1960s. Goes into labor. Closest hospital is a white hospital. My water has broken. Can I please be admitted to have my baby? No. We don't serve Negroes. So she turns around, walks outside, and gives birth to her child on the lawn in front of the hospital. Why? Because of the dedication to segregation. Hippocratic oath, do no harm. First things first, no Negroes. Then maybe do no harm. The dedication that this region and this nation has to segregation, to Jim Crow, is complete and absolute. Hospitals, railroads, theaters, pet cemeteries. That's one of my favorite segregation laws. How do you segregate a pet cemetery? By the race of the
Owner.
So if Fifi was owned by a black person, Fifi is buried in the south side of the cemetery. We always get the south side. If Fifi was owned by a white person, Fifi's born on the north side of the cemetery. In the American South, from the 1860s to the 1960s, you were born in a segregated space. You lived your life in a segregated space. You worked and played in segregated spaces. And when you died, you were buried in segregated cemeteries because it was against the law for dead black people and dead white people to be buried in the same spaces. We also see the racial classification rule, the one-drop rule.
Yeah.
Because we got to figure out, the state's got to figure out who's black, right? For some of us, that's real clear. So, oh yeah, you definitely black. But we're gonna make the rules. One drop. Everyone else white, black grandparent, you're black. Black great-grandparent, everybody else white. Black great-grandparent, black. We gotta know who's who, right? And so this is segregation. And the question on the table is, how did we respond? How did we respond? So that's it for the slides. But this is a real quick primer about what segregation is and how it operates, right? It is an operating system, again, that is designed to segregate black folk out of the mainstream of American society. It is profoundly unequal. But within this system, right, the scholar Robin Kelly says that while in the midst of segregation, we get to engage in congregation. What does that mean? It means, hey, we're all living in the same neighborhood. That means we're all going to the same school. We're all going to the same churches. We need a grocery store. We need a book club. We need a juke joint. We need all the things that we need, and we are in these communities building these institutions to respond to and to navigate the realities of segregation, of Jim Crow. So when we jump up to 2026, what we see, right, is we see two things I would suggest. We see a resurgence of these political inclinations that we saw in the past, right, to erase black electoral power, right, to erase black history, right? We see a resurgence of that, right? But it never actually completely went away, right? Right? There's minstrelsy and the racist stereotypes. Did we get rid of that? Is that gone? No, it's not gone. Just go on YouTube any day of the week. You see somebody with some bugged out eyes, black or white, right? You see people accessing those racist ideas, those racist stereotypes, those racist images, so on and so forth. So that's how I'm thinking in terms of giving us some ideas and understanding of this thing that people keep talking about now, right? This thing called Jim Crow. When we say, man, this is Jim Crow 2.0, yes, and, right? Because when we get to the civil rights period, civil rights activists know this is all fragile. Legislation can be passed, and legislation can be what? Undone. Supreme Court cases can be ruled on, and they can be overturned. Right? So a whole bunch of, so there's a bunch of activists who always say, hey, don't sleep. Stay woke. Right? And some of us heard the call, and some of us didn't. And one of the crucial things that's going to be brought to bear on us now, right, is how do we respond? Again, history is our guide. How do we respond? Let's go back to the past. What did we do? We built institutions and organizations. Right? We were in community with each other, in part because we had to be, but there was benefits of that. Right? The other thing we did is we mobilized politically, voted. Right? We understood this has got to be really important because it's viewed as dangerous. So voting is crucial. That's one of the most crucial tools in our toolbox. Not the only tool. Because when you go back in the past, what did they do? They protested. They were out in the streets when they needed to be out in the streets for the purpose of shifting and changing the conversation. Right?
All right, so take your cell phone. There's a QR code on the screen here, and they'll be put up there. I want you to log in. I just want you to register. And the end result of this, I'm trying to give you a hint since you're here. If you give me a majority of the sessions on Sunday morning, I got a treat for you at the end. We're going to do a night at the museum. I've talked to Dr. Russ Whittington, a former professor at Rhodes College, who is now the president of the National Civil Rights Museum, where we will have our own FBC opportunity to go to the Civil Rights Museum to see the new part that has just recently been opened. And you will also have access to tour the museum by guide and by individuals who can explain what's going on. I think we need to do that. And I think we need to certainly re-engage around this conversation in a healthy way and then form strategy to move forward. Would you agree with that? All right, so log in and make sure you're here. I need you to be here about 3 times at least, at minimal. I know you got some vacation Sundays and all that coming up, but try to give me at least 3 out of the 5 that we're going to do so we can get there and do that. And then I want you to look at some history in your own church. In the connector lobby between the Victory Center and the new facility that we're in now, there's a small little lobby there that has this cast mold in it. And it is from the state of Tennessee archives when African American men were given the right to vote in the state of Tennessee. It was about to be destroyed because the Tennessee legislative body said this is of no significance to us. And it was in the archives in the basement of some of their spaces, and so many more artifacts around African American history as it relates to the state of Tennessee before it came to my knowledge was destroyed. I had an opportunity to be in contact with a previous governor, Governor Haslam, and it was during his administration that I learned about it, and I asked him, could we buy it here at the church and preserve it, because it's a piece of American history, Tennessee history. And he said, if you want it, I will arrange for it to be gifted to your church. It was in terrible shape, but we restored it. And that's the piece that's in the lobby right over here. You should go see it because it shows African American men in 1867 being able to cast their vote. They had written it down on a card or a piece of paper to drop it in a box. And the women are standing in the background looking. And when you look at that art piece, it is because women had not been given the right to vote as of yet. And so we wanted to preserve that and keep it in the archives of African American history and in this church. So when I ain't the pastor no more, don't y'all have no meeting about getting rid of that. All right, y'all keep that, because we need to keep these kinds of things before us so that we'll know. And I put 2 placards up around it so you'll know the history, but I know people don't always get a chance to stop and read them. But it's important that we have that. I want to talk a little bit about the 14th Amendment. You mentioned something, because many of us don't know that the 14th Amendment is right now under attack. All right, the 14th Amendment, equal protection of laws. One of the things that the back door is open to, which, and don't fall for this, y'all, ICE ain't all about others. When I take away the rights of people who have those inherent rights born in the United States, right? And I use the 14th Amendment to strip away the equal protection of laws. The equal protection of laws also covers people in this room, right? Talk a little bit about the 14th Amendment and the space where we are right now, if you will.
Sure. Once again, one of the things that I'm always thinking about, right, is our history. We're not talking about 300 years ago.
Right.
We're not talking about 500 years ago. When I take my children, once I took my sons, Natalie and I, my wife Natalie McKinney and I, took our sons to the Civil Rights Museum with my parents. My parents were in town visiting, and there was a portion of the exhibit right when you go in and you see people picking cotton, right? And my father turned to my sons and started telling stories about when he was picking cotton when he was a kid. Right? The first line out of his mouth was, I could pick 200 pounds of cotton in a day. Ask me why, I know that. Because that's what I had to do before I went to middle school. That's what I had to do before I went to high school. Right? This is not 400 years ago. Charles and Lil McKinney live in Memphis right now. Right? Your parents, your grandparents, some of you, right? Some of the elders in the room, you were born in this era. Some of you might have picked some cotton, picked a little cotton. Some of y'all might know a little bit of something about that, right? Cotton in certain areas, tobacco in other areas, right? So we don't have to go out somewhere and find, we don't have to Google this. We can just ask Big Mama or Mama or Daddy or Uncle, right? So when it comes to these assaults, this assault on the 14th Amendment, like you said, Pastor Norman, there's a lot of backdooring of the 14th Amendment, right? So, and one of the ways you do that is you say, hey, don't worry about it. Look, hey, citizens, don't worry about it. We're going after the bad people. We're going after the criminals. We're going after the quote-unquote illegals. Nobody is illegal on stolen land, right? We're going after the marginalized. We're going after the dispossessed. We're going after the weakest links. So don't worry about it. And there's always political capital to be made. There's always political hay to be made when politicians say, look, you know what, you're not the problem, they're the problem. Right? And then we get in these spaces where a critical mass of people say, oh, okay, you know what, this sounds good. This is good. This is for what? Safety.
Yep.
Plessy v. Ferguson. We don't want them sitting in first-class cars. Why? Because of safety. We don't want them in our neighborhoods because of safety. We don't want them in our schools because of safety. That's why we moved from trying to integrate high schools. Little Rock, 1957. That's why one of the strategies the NAACP says, we got to stop trying to integrate high schools because there's so much energy around, oh my God, these black people are in these schools and these boys, oh my God, these boys. That's why they moved from high schools to elementary schools. That's part of the strategy. So the 14th Amendment is being backdoored. Hey, you know what? We're going to chip away at this 14th Amendment with these folks. It is crucial that we don't buy the okie doke because we will always be those folks.
Yep.
We will always be those folks. Don't get it twisted because you went to college and middle class and comfortable. Don't get it twisted because you go to a big fancy church. Don't get it twisted. There's a whole bunch of people in the room right now. If I asked you to stand up because you got slung over the hood of a cop car while you were engaged in not breaking the law, somebody would probably stand up.
On my way to church,
Somebody would probably stand up. You can lose your life going to get some Skittles and making your way back to your father's house. You can lose your life playing video games in your own home.
My.
You can be murdered, and people say you deserved it, regardless of what you do. Because that fear and that anger and that anxiety is not predicated on what you do, it's predicated on who you are. So don't get it twisted. Oh man, yeah, let's clean up these. Let's go get these quote unquote illegals. And like Pastor Norman said, don't sleep. Haitians, Jamaicans. Matter of fact, even in terms of deportation, black folk are a higher percentage.
Right.
A disproportionate percentage of folks being deported. We tend to associate that with people from Central and South America. Proportionally, Haiti. Dominican Republic, Jamaica, right? So this 14th Amendment is being chipped away, and the Voting Rights Act being hollowed out, right? This equal protection. You've got folks now, the President of the United States, trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. Mm-hmm. Hey, yeah, we know we said that if you were born in the country, you were an American citizen. Well, that just applied, we think that should just apply to black people. Because we found these other instances of people using citizenship to manipulate the system and to stay here and blah, blah, blah. Don't fall for the okie doke. Because we will always be in line to be those people. Always. Right? And so again, we've got to be mindful of these moves that are being made. And this is, again, gets back to why voting is so important, right? The capacity we have to hold elected officials accountable, right, is going to go a long way in this moment.
So as an hour, we're quarter of the hours, but a couple of other points and questions. I want you to lean a little bit. You mentioned other groups as well, and there is a great body of work, Eddie Glaudet and others, yourself, participating in, who talk about this in some way or another, the browning of America, all right? This concept of America in the 2030 window to the 2040 window. Now we're in 20 what? All right, so possibly 13 to 14 years from now, well, 5 to 10 years from now, in a window of 5 to 10 years, that the numbers start tilting so that brown America, inclusive of other groups if they were to remain and not be deported, outnumber. And with brown America combined, Latino, African American, others, would tilt the scale. And if we were unified, this would be the majority. So there was this work that began in the Project 2025 and other stuff even before then was aimed at how do you cap that. This, and by the way, that's not a new concept, right? The Hebrew women give birth faster. And so if we kill the boys, incarcerate the boys, if we cut off their production, we can control the numbers. This is a concept that's borrowed from the Bible, really. It's not new. And so these are important things. While you think on that a little bit, the browning of America, we go into that, I want to give you an experience, a real-time experience. You mentioned a shadow of what happened to Trayvon Martin. The night the Trayvon Martin case was decided, I and my family were at a very nice resort, less than 5 miles from the courthouse. And we were outside. My sons and daughters were outside, and they were just kids, and they were at the swimming pool and playing with everybody. And when the case was decided in favor of the plaintiff and not the victim, the greatest sense of fear I have ever felt for my children came over me. And I immediately told my kids, come on, let's go inside. They didn't know why. But out of fear that there would be a riot, you're talking about down the street and around the corner from the courthouse. And I'm sitting at this nice resort, and I'm saying, how can these two things exist at the same time? How can I feel such a sense of we're enjoying life as we should as a family, our inheritance, but this fear that something could happen, especially to my boys and my girls, and that the court would find the guy who did it innocent, and my boy or my girl or me guilty or wrong. And I was so messed up that night. I think we had to stay in the house and watch movies for the rest of the trip. And we were at a huge resort and all over Florida, and I just had a sense of fear. And I can remember that today. And so as we think about these things that are happening, as we think about this America changing and why people are fighting, trying to control what happens, who gets to share in the power, who gets to live in the space of autonomy and equity. What do we do? And then what does the church do? That's a great, Eddie leans into that a lot. He's another scholar, a friend of ours. We did some conversations like this together before.
Yeah, Morehouse class of 89.
Yeah, Morehouse, 89.
So,
87 was the best class. But,
So this concept of browning of America, I want to highlight something else that's very deeply related to that. If you go online now, and if you're knocking around on the news and stuff, one of the things you'll see a lot of people on the far right and the center right actually start talking about is the birth dearth.
yeah.
Right? Birth rates have declined. Right? Birth rates are declining. We need to be having more babies, so on and so forth. Right? Well, whose birth rates have declined?
Yeah.
Right? And as Tressie Cottom, this brilliant sociologist, this sister named Tressie Cottom, Cottom, follow her on all of the socials. She's absolutely brilliant. She was like, as a black woman, no one has ever rolled up on me and asked me to have more babies. Right? So all of this anxiety, back to this anxiety, all of this anxiety around the birth rate, whose birth rate? Whose birth rate are you anxious about?
Right.
Who's not having babies? Right? And so all of this talk, all of this rhetoric, all of this chatter about how this is going to have dire consequences for the nation. Let's just call this what it is, right? It's white folks being like, hey, we need to have more white babies. White folks, we need to make more. We need to be making more white folks, right? To do what? To stave off this browning of America, right? Demographics, as a social science friend of mine says, demographics are not destiny. So yes, right, the makeup of the country in 30 years, in 40 years, will look dramatically different than it does now, the browning of America. But here's the tricky part. Race changes. Race changes. If you got in a time machine and got on that time machine and went back to Boston, Massachusetts in 1840 and went to a bar, not that you would ever go to a bar.
This congregation can go to bars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then glory. Come on. This is a good church.
This is a good church. Yeah, this is a good church.
If you go to a bar in Boston in 1840, there's going to be a sign up, and that sign is going to say, "No dogs are Irish." No Irish. Why? Because the Irish weren't considered white. What is white? WASP. White. Anglo-Saxon. Protestant. Irish. Are they Protestant? No.
No.
Catholic.
Catholic.
And that was enough to constitute an idea, a notion of racial difference. There's a great book out called How the Irish Became White. All kinds of white folks that we know now to be white, 150 years ago, were not categorized as white. What happens? More and more Irish folk come into the country. More and more Irish folks amass political and economic power, move into the mainstream of American life. 1840 in Boston, no dogs are Irish. 2026, St. Patrick's Day, we dye the river green in honor of St. Patrick's Day.
Right.
So what does that mean? It means that race changes. So the country might get browner, but the question becomes, how will race change? Because there's a whole bunch of folks who have the option of accessing that category of whiteness that are going to take the opportunity to do so, right? So a lot of the anxiety is like, oh my God, so there's gonna be all these brown people, there's gonna be all these black people, and they're all gonna be Democrats. No, they're not, right? Cuban Americans, where do they vote? How do they vote? How's their vote line up? How's that vote align racially, right? So there's a whole bunch of folks who are going to be like, oh, I get to operate and move as a white person. I get the benefits and privileges of whiteness, despite I might be a little swarthy in the skin. Oh, yes, please, check up. Right? So demographics are not destiny. So that's the thing, right? Is we have to ensure that we've built the coalitions, right? We've built the political infrastructure and a cultural infrastructure, I would say, that is inclusive enough for, right, people of color to operate in a way that ultimately benefits everybody. See, the thing about the pushback against black politics, right, is that black folk are way too expansive. Back to this thing about education. These former slaves did not say, we want public education for black children. They said, we want public education for everybody. 1966, a bunch of activists, Martin Luther King and Bayard Rustin and other folks, put together the Freedom Budget. 1966. Healthcare. What, for black people? No, for everybody. Guaranteed minimum income. Everybody, this country makes trillions of dollars a year. Everybody should get a check. Why? To live, to subsist. Just black people? No, everybody. Right? So one of the reasons there is so much pushback against a black agenda is that while we are always advocating for ourselves, we are advocating for ourselves in ways that will ultimately benefit the entire nation. right? And that's a political position that a whole bunch of folk got a problem with. I don't want all of y'all to have all the things. I just want my crew over here to have all the things. The rest of you, you're on your own. Right? And so that's the thing about this browning of America. What does it look like to be in coalition with people? What does it look like to be in community with people? So that when it's time to vote, when it's time to be out in the streets, when it's time to engage in all of the activities we need to be engaging in to move us forward, we can move collectively. Martin King did not have to come to Memphis, Tennessee in 1968. The man had won a Nobel Peace Prize. He could have just gone off and become president of Morehouse College. He could have just gone to Atlanta and been the pastor of Ebenezer. Could have lived happily ever after. But some of the most marginalized men, some of the most marginalized people in Memphis society reached out to him and said, "Hey, Doc, we need your help." And without hesitation, he said, "Yeah, I'll be there. Because I don't care about your class status. Your class status is not going to stop me from being in community with you, from showing you love. We need a little bit more of that right about now, too. Because this thing about the browning of America, these divisions and schisms we see, it's a whole bunch of haves and have-nots. It's a whole bunch of people who are like, I got mine. You need to get yours. I'm good. I'm comfortable. I'm able to do all of the things that I want to be able to do. So I'm fine. And I'm also fine with policies that enrich me and mine. And if it makes things a little harder for you, well, I'm sorry about that. Maybe if you just worked a little harder and pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, then maybe you'll be okay. That's a part of the challenge that we face in this moment as well. The browning of America, yeah, right. The increased poverty in America, the increased displacement, the increased dislocation, the increased levels of non-white unemployment, right? The increased ways that we face anxiety and uncertainty and chaos. We have an opportunity and the challenge. It's a challenge and an opportunity. What does it look like to build community with folk who don't look like me? We can be really good at that. This moment here in town, with the invasion of federal forces, there's a whole bunch of folk out here being like, hey, you know what? Snatching up brown people, that's a little too close to home. We need to do something about that. So when I go to these meetings, I see a whole bunch of faces that look like mine up in those meetings because they know and understand that, but for the sake of God, because it's not too much of a stretch for us to imagine our children being snatched up. That's not a stretch at all. After Trayvon Martin, walking with my son, no, it wasn't after Trayvon, it was after, I can't even remember which murder it happened.
Michael Brown.
But my son, who is 26 now, we're walking around the block, and he was like, well, I was so-and-so, I was 12 when so-and-so was killed. I was 14 when so-and-so was killed. I was 16 when so-and-so was killed. It's like the rings of a tree.
Yeah.
He could mark his life by the death of black people. And he was getting ready to go off to college. He went to Xavier. And, and we're so intensely proud of him and to, go off to the thing, he went to, graduate from White Station. He's going to go conquer the world. And in that moment, I was like, I want to homeschool you. I'm a college professor. I think I'm good for 4 years worth of college.
Yeah.
I can work this out. Maybe you should go to Rhodes and live at home. I literally fear for your life. And I am comfortably middle class. Another one of our challenges and opportunities, right, is how the church has been so central to our existence. The church, the community, the space, the opportunity, the ability to dream dreams, plot and scheme schemes, to praise an awesome and sovereign God. Charles Adams, the late great Charles Adams, had this sermon, said, you know what? He heard my cries when I was being trapped and beaten and transported to a strange and foreign land. Right. He heard me pray out in the slave fields and broke up the conspiracy to destroy me.
Right.
That's the God I serve. The God who said, no, that's enough. We're not doing that anymore. And what you were saying earlier today, Pastor, about this covenant, the other thing that we understood, a covenant is an agreement, right? God ain't gonna do everything for us. And we just kind of sit back and watch Netflix and wait for the miracle to happen. No, that's not how Exodus worked. That's not how the Civil Rights Movement worked.
Right.
And that's not how it's gonna work now.
Right.
The covenant is, okay, what is our assignment? What are we tasked to do for us, but also in particular for the least of these?
Yeah.
I'm a history professor, so I got a book assignment for you. Howard Thurman.
Yeah.
Book called Jesus. I see you nodding, sister. Jesus and the Disinherited. There's the book Martin Luther King carried with him for the last 15 years of his life.
Yeah.
It was in his suitcase when he came to Memphis. Jesus and the Disinherited, Howard Thurman. What does it look like when we take God's relationship to the disinherited seriously? How does our religion shift? How does our sense of community shift? How does our sense of obligation, communal and political obligation, shift when we center the least of these? So if we do that, then this browning of America can go the way a whole lot of folks are scared it might go.
Yeah.
Right? If we see this as an opportunity to build an expanded sense of a beloved community across racial lines, across cultural lines, across socioeconomic lines, it could be a beautiful thing.
Jesus and the Disinherited got me put on probation at seminary, in my master's program, because at the seminary, which was white Presbyterian seminary, the professors basically were going to all of these book conferences and coming back with the books that they thought we should be reading. And none of them were black theologians. And so I challenged one of my professors once who didn't like to be challenged. I said, do we ever get assignments on Howard Thurman? And some of my white colleagues didn't know who Howard Thurman was. This is in the 90s. And they were graduating with master's and doctorate degrees. And I said, when are we going to study like Howard Thurman? I knew who Howard Thurman was from Morehouse and exposure and the courses there. And when we pushed it, she just kind of recommended that I don't speak up like that. But the dean at the time was Barbara Holmes, a black female, who was well acquainted with the work of Howard Thurman. And once she read the appeal, once she read the reason why, I was kind of told to stay in my place, she incorporated a class on Howard Thurman into the curriculum, of which they found a professor who had studied under Howard Thurman, who opened one of the first multicultural churches that was really well known out in San Francisco in the country. So this young lady comes in to teach, and the white students fall in love with Howard Thurman. They felt they had never heard of Howard Thurman. And the white students were like, in protest, why have we never heard of this guy? And all of a sudden, I was sitting there in that class after I was reinstated going, because we are often immersed in the theological views of others, but others are not required to be immersed in our theological views. The Cross and the Lynching Tree, another great read that we kind of pushed that needed to happen. James Cone, and then Michelle Michelle's book on the new Jim Crow that she wrote. I want you to spend a few minutes talking about some of the books you've written. You have several, and can we get them? Oh,
Yes, you can.
yeah. Can we get them? All right.
Available at fine bookstores everywhere. So the book that I think might be of particular interest to you all is a volume that I co-edited with my colleague Aaron Gutsuzian over at the University of Memphis, and it's called An Unseen Light: Black Struggles for Freedom in Memphis, Tennessee. And it's an edited volume, about 18 chapters of folks talking about the black freedom struggle from emancipation all the way up to the murder of Darius Stewart. So it covers a wide swath. And again, it's an edited volume, so it's 18 chapters, 18 different people. But it's called An Unseen Light: Black Struggles for Freedom in Memphis, Tennessee. I think that's the one that you'll probably be the most interested in. I used to say back in the day, our baby boy, Chioke, just graduated from Howard a couple weeks ago. And I used to say, yeah, y'all please go out and buy these books because Daddy needs to buy some new shoes. Because the boy's feet, he's like a duck. I was like, what size shoe do you wear now? You should be a swimmer. Those huge feet. I don't have that excuse anymore, right? Present company excluded. I don't have that excuse anymore, but I think that's the one. I think that's the one that you'll be interested in. And this story about Howard Thurman, right? Again, this gets back to the enormity of segregation, right? And how segregation, it's like, so, what's the song? So wide, can't get around it. So low, can't get under it, right? We don't grapple with, well, some of us don't grapple with the enormity of that, right? Many years ago, I attended a church that was dedicated to racial reconciliation. And I was having a casual conversation with one of the pastors, and I was like, yeah, okay, we're talking about racial reconciliation. And I said, so what Martin King have you all read?
Right.
And he was like, well, he was a great man and a wonderful Christian. I haven't really read any of his work. And I was like, once again, Scooby-Doo, ruh-roh. I was like, let me get this straight. You all have a heart for racial reconciliation. And this is multiracial, ministerial staff, right? It's black folk, white folk. You have a heart for racial reconciliation. You want to figure out a way to bring people together across racial lines. And you haven't read a word of a minister whose literal sole purpose in life was to do that work. And he did that work under the most adverse conditions imaginable in the 1950s and 60s and laid out a blueprint for us to do that work. And it has never occurred to you to read any of his work. Not a sermon, not a book, not an article. That's the power of segregation. Yeah. Right? Where you can go to college, you can go to seminary, you can go to graduate school and a professional school, right? And not read a single word produced by a black scholar. Right. And consider yourself educated. Right? Even though, right, black scholars are in many instances focusing on the thing you say you want to focus on. Right? So you're running around talking about how do we grapple with, right? How do we grapple with, what's Jesus have to tell us about racial inequality? What does Jesus have to tell us about, right, how to move through the world and society? How does Jesus have to help us grapple with difference? And so I've got the work in the New Testament, and I've got some other stuff here, but I don't have any of the work of the theologians, of the black thinkers who spent 200 years answering that question. Yeah. So you just out here sort of freestyling. Oh, well, give it. What are you doing, man? What are we doing? That's the power of segregation. And one of the things that we understood, right, is that that segregation diminishes all of us, not just black folk,
Yeah.
right? Divinity schools all across the nation that don't engage in black theology, black Christian scholarship, are diminished
Yep.
because you're not accessing the work of people who have been answering these questions for literally 2 centuries.
Centuries.
Richard Allen had to answer this question in 1787, founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. When he and Absalom Jones went into the Methodist Episcopal Church that they were members of in Philadelphia at lunch at noontime, and got up and went up to the to altar to pray, and got yanked up, pulled up by the white pastor and his ushers. What are you doing? We're praying, and let us pray, and then we'll be done, and then we'll leave. No, get out now. Again, what's the priority? What's the dedication? Segregation and racial subordination. In that moment, was more important than these men praying to the Lord God Almighty. We don't care that you're praying. Get out. So he goes out and was, you know what? That's the last time I go in that church. So how do we navigate this moment? We need to build our own church. First, we're going to build an organization called the Free African Society, a community in Philadelphia of black folk. We're going to come together communally and figure out how do we navigate the realities and vagaries of being black in Philadelphia in the 1780s. How do we navigate life in a country that has sanctified slavery? How do we navigate life in a place that deems us inferior, or having open debates as to whether or not we're even human? First, we're going to create the Free African Society. And then we're going to create the African Methodist Episcopal Church, AME Church. And at no point in time do the leaders of that church say, and now we will turn our backs on white people. No. We hope to be in community with our white brothers. We hope that one day they will see the error of their ways so that we can be in true community. But we ain't waiting on that. We have to build our own thing for our safety, for our souls, for our betterment. So we have always navigated, right, the particular and the universal. We have always navigated what does it mean to be in community like this, and then what does it mean to go out in the world and build community out there too. We have always been able to navigate that duality. And so we've got religious thinkers over the course of centuries who have discussed this, who have talked about this. And you can go to divinity school right now and get an MDiv and not read a single word from these men and women, right, who have created this body of knowledge for us that is such a powerful, powerful blueprint in this moment in terms of how Christians should be thinking about this chaos and this anxiety and this disconnection fueled by racism, right? Fueled by, hey, you know what? It's us and them. Which side are you on? We're on Jesus' side.
Amen.
We're on the side of the cross.
Yeah.
And if we have to transgress, and if that means we gotta break some teapots, that means we gotta make some folks uncomfortable in the ways in which we move, well then so be it. We got practice with that.
We got some history with that.
We got a little bit of history with that. We've done that before and we will do it again.
Would y'all give Dr. Charles McKinney a hand? This is just the beginning. Yeah. This is just beginning. Amen. Let me give you a few takeaways real quick that I want you to have. You're going to get an email this week if you registered on the login, and we're going to leave it up because some people said they couldn't scan it, so we're going to leave it up a few minutes. Need you to log in, and we're going to, from each week going forward, It's going to be timed. It's going to be based on your arrival. So like if you get here like at 1 minute before we end, you won't be able to log in. All right, so you need to get here like school, right? You don't get no credit for being in class 2 minutes. But we want you to log in, and we're going to send you an email so that if you have a specific question, there's so many people, we knew that we we're going to have that. We want to take the questions and kind of fuse them together. Some of them are going to be in the same area. So we want to create the body of conversation going forward. If you're watching online, you can put your question in the chat, I believe, and we can get them from that. All right? Be careful, and the reason I ask him to talk about his books and a little bit about some of the authors, listen, I don't go around redacting books and information like others do, like eliminating roots from the Knox County school system reading list and stuff like that. But I do tell people to watch what you read and who influences you, because what you take in is what you put out. I'm very careful when I go to churches where I hear people quote Dietrich Bonhoeffer without referring to other theologians that I'm well acquainted with who are African American or whom have a more expansive body of work. Even when it comes to the pedagogy of the oppressed, a book that was once banned at one point in the United States, that kind of reading you need to be exposed to. Dietrich Bonhoeffer made these wonderful quotes about the Holocaust while living in New York, in Harlem, talking about the atrocities of the Holocaust, but never said anything about hangings in the United States. And it perplexes me how you can see Germany from New York, but not Kentucky. That was always a question I had. How can you sit here and see what happens? And I see that same thing being played out sometimes as to what certain people deserve. And I'm like, I get it. They deserve that. But, we did too. Or our children do too. We lived in a system in Memphis, and I know some of you all may realize this, where if you opened up your book on the first day of school, you could see the school that it had come from, because it was new when they got it, and it was used when we got it, right? And these are the kinds of things that were happening, and I'm not talking about that happened in the 18 nothings. I'm talking about in the 19s last, right? And then up until the 2000 something, when they tried to do some of the same thing over here at the school, and we just went down there and protested and said, no, it's not going to happen. Brewster School is as a result of the work of this church. Herbert Brewster is a pastor in the city of Memphis, and we insisted that the landmarks in this community began to reflect the names of the people who are the majority of this community. And we went down in protest. That day we filled up the sanctuary at the church down there. Some of y'all weren't here then, but they were having a meeting about what the community was going to look like and new schools and all this kind of stuff and who's going to be named after. And they didn't tell us about it, so we all got together and wore red. And you remember that? We all put on red shirts, and we got there an hour before the doors opened and took all the seats. And it wasn't nothing but folk in there wearing red. And then the news people were there, and then somebody called the mayor, and they said, you need to get here because the other people who came for the meeting can't sit down. And he said, what's the problem? He said, all these people got on red. And he said, find out who they are. And so the mayor called me on my cell phone and said, what is it y'all trying to prove? I said, you'll see when we get here, when you get here. And so we had a conversation on the phone. And then they canceled the meeting and then said, we're going to redesign this community. He listened to what we had to say. Said, we're going to redesign this community, but the way we're going to do it is we're going to bring all of the stakeholders together, and everybody gets to sit down at the table and talk about what we want in this community. And that's when we started to get access to land and, say, green space and these kinds of things, and the gentrification model would not drive out the residents of this community in such a way that they couldn't afford to live here. So all of that kind of stuff was a part of activism and the way to go forward. Again, I want to thank Dr. Charles McKinney for being here with us on today. I want to thank each of you for being faithful to stay. We are going to do this the entire month of June, culminating on the last Sunday of June. And I really want to spend this time in healthy ways. So when you send your questions in from the email as we've gathered your information, we're going to talk about it and try to segment them by week so that we can look at the way forward to make sure that we get there. Hopefully also to have some strategic ideas at the very end. All right? Thank you again for being here.